Over the past weekend, we got the first Star Wars movie in 7 years. So now it's time to rank all 13 theatrically released Star Wars movies from the worst to the best. For my last place is The Phantom Menace. Now, there are definitely things in here that work. The opening 15 minutes are pretty exciting. Seeing Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi as Jedi in their prime immediately gives the movie that classic Star Wars energy. The pod racing scene is still a fun set piece, and the last 20 minutes are easily the best part of the entire movie. And Darth Maul is awesome. He barely says anything, but the design and the double-bladed lightsaber, the intensity, and that final duel all make him one of the most memorable villains in the franchise. And of course, Duel of the Fates is one of the greatest pieces of music John Williams has ever written. But the problem is that when people talk about the movie, they usually talk about the opening, the pod race, and the final lightsaber fight. Everything else in between is where the movie really struggles. For a movie that is supposed to begin the story of Anakin Skywalker, the story is weirdly dull for long stretches. There's a lot of political discussion about trade routes, blockades, sunheads, votes of no confidence, taxation, and it does not make for the most exciting Star Wars movie. The idea behind it is interesting. Palpatine is manipulating the political system from within. We are seeing how democracy slowly weakens before becoming an empire. That is a great concept, but the execution is pretty boring. And then, of course, we have Jar Jar Binks, who feels like the movie is stopping so somebody can trip, fall, step and poo, or make a weird noise. The biggest issue, though, is that Anakin does not feel like the emotional center of the movie. Obi-Wan honestly feels like the main character. Anakin is important to the plot, but I do not feel deeply attached to him by the end. So while The Phantom Menace has some great moments, especially Darth Maul and the score, as a final product, it is easily the weakest film. Number 12, Attack the Clones. I will say this, I do think it is a slight improvement over The Phantom Menace. There is actually a really interesting movie buried somewhere inside here, and most of that movie involves Obi-Wan. The subplot of Obi-Wan investigating Padme's attempted assassination is genuinely fascinating. It feels like a detective story inside the Star Wars universe. It follows clues, discovers Kamino, finds the clone army, meets Jango Fett, and slowly uncovers pieces of a massive conspiracy involving the Jedi, the Republic, and Sith. That stuff works. Jango Fett is cool. Seeing young Boba Fett as an interesting connection to the original trilogy. The idea that the Republic's army has secretly been created without the Jedi fully understanding who ordered it or what it actually is one of the most intriguing concepts in the prequels. But every time the movie cuts back to Anakin and Padme is where things start to fall apart. Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman are incredibly awkward and wooden in this movie. Their romance is supposed to be the emotional foundation for Anakin's eventual fall, and instead it is full of awkward conversations, stiff delivery, and scenes that do not feel natural. The infamous "I don't like sand" speech is infamous for a reason. But the bigger issue is that the relationship itself is hard to believe. Padme keeps ignoring red flags from Anakin, and I don't mean small red flags, I mean giant glowing red flags. He admits to murdering an entire tribe of Tusken Raiders, and somehow the movie still expects us to believe this is the beginning of a great tragic romance. That is a huge problem. The film has elements I really like. Obi-Wan's mystery plot is great, the clone conspiracy is interesting, the arena battle has some fun moments, and the lightsaber fights are also really cool, but the romance is the central crux of the movie, and it just does not work. So for me, it is better than Phantom Menace, but not by a big bar. Number 11, Clone Wars, which barely feels like a movie. That is probably because it obviously is just the first few episodes of the show stitched together, or at least theatrically. You can feel it in the pacing, story structure, and the way the plot moves. It does not feel like a movie. It does not flow like a movie. It feels like a TV pilot that got pushed onto the big screen. The plot is all over the place, the tone is uneven, the animation is still finding itself, and as a theatrical Star Wars experience, it just does not work very well. The funny thing is that the Clone Wars series eventually became some of the best Star Wars storytelling ever. The show gave us incredible character arcs, deeper development for Anakin and Obi-Wan, great stories with the clones, and some truly emotional moments later on, and Ahsoka also evolves into one of the best characters in the franchise. But the movie is not the show at its best. It's a rough beginning. And as a movie, it feels like someone hit play all on the first 4 episodes and something designed to be watched in theaters. So even though I love what Clone Wars the series eventually became, the movie itself has to stay near the bottom. Number 10, Mandalorian and Grogu. This is where I start getting more positive, because overall, I did like this movie. I had fun with it. If you're already invested in The Mandalorian and Grogu in this era of Star Wars storytelling, there is definitely enjoyment to be had here. The action is solid, Grogu continues to steal every scene he's in, and there are enough exciting moments, emotional beats, and fan service surprises to keep longtime fans entertained. But at the same time, just like Clone Wars, the movie never really feels like a movie. It feels like a season of TV compressed into theatrical runtime, and because of that, the narrative feels clunky, repetitive, and smaller in scale than it probably should. It also shares some of the same issues as Season 3 of The Mandalorian, although thankfully I do think this is more focused and more competent overall than that season was. The biggest issue is that this movie basically just becomes Fetch Quest, the movie. Mando gets assigned a mission, travels to a location, interrogates somebody, does them a favor, goes somewhere else, fights enemies, gives another clue, repeats the process. The film keeps cycling through that structure over and over again. In episodic television, that formula can work really well, because each stop along the journey feels like its own adventure. You get breathing room, you get time to explore characters, worlds, and side stories. When you condense that same structure into a movie, it starts to feel repetitive instead of adventurous. There were multiple points where I felt like I was watching someone play a video game. Fight a wave of smaller enemies, fight the mini-boss, travel to the next level, solve a puzzle, sneak through a stealth section, fight another boss. Ironically, the Disney Plus show often managed to make relatively small stories feel cinematic and epic, while this theatrical movie sometimes feels like a really expensive TV season. One of the most surprising aspects is that one of the central plot lines is basically the same setup as the 2008 Clone Wars movie, rescuing Jabba's son, Rada. When I first realized that, I was worried because that plotline already felt kind of thin the first time. But I will give the movie credit here. The direction they take Rada as a character is genuinely interesting. He has changed a lot since we last saw him, and they take him in a direction I really was not expecting for a Hutt character. There is actually some emotional and thematic material here that had real potential. And honestly, I almost wish the movie had focused more heavily on Rada and his backstory, because that ended up being one of the most intriguing parts of the film. You can tell that there is a history there. There is trauma, growth, and change that happened off screen, and I wanted more of that instead of constantly jumping to the next mission objective. And visually, the movie does look very good. You can absolutely tell where the budget went. The action sequences are energetic, the creature effects are solid, the costumes and production design still have that lived-in Star Wars texture fans love, and seeing this world back on the big screen again does add some excitement. There is something really special about hearing blasters, ships, and lightspeed jumps in the theater again after so many years without a theatrical Star Wars film. And I have to talk about the score, because it is probably one of the most unique musical identities we have gotten in Star Wars since the Clone Wars movie. Instead of trying to imitate John Williams directly, music adds this synth-heavy electronic flavor at points that honestly remind me of Tron Legacy. It gives the movie a very different flavor compared to most Star Wars films, and I appreciated that it was trying something stylistically different. And of course, Grogu remains the best part of the entire movie. At this point, it almost feels impossible not to smile while he's on screen. They know how to use him without completely overdoing it. He brings the heart, humor, and emotional warmth that keeps the movie grounded whenever the plot starts wandering too much. Pedro Pascal still does a good job as Din Djarin, even though emotionally I do think the character is not as strong compared to the series. Early on, his arc had such a strong emotional core about identity, belief, and fatherhood. Here, he's mostly functioning as a cool action hero who's the plot forward. He's still likable, but the movie does not really challenge him in a major new way, and that is kind of the overall issue with the movie. It's entertaining, but it rarely feels essential. It feels smaller than a theatrical Star Wars film should. The stakes never quite reach that epic cinematic level people usually associate with Star Wars on the big screen. It is more like spending 2 hours hanging out with characters you already enjoy. And to be fair, plenty of fans are going to love that. I did have fun with it myself. But if you are a more casual fan who fell off the Disney Plus shows or only casually follows Star Wars, I do not think this is a must-see theatrical event. For me, Mandalorian and Grogu is a good Star Wars movie, but not a great one. Fans will probably enjoy the ride, even if the story feels repetitive and smaller in scale than expected. Number 9, Solo. I have a lot of fun with this movie. It had a messy production, and you can feel that a little bit. This is a movie that went through director changes, behind-the-scenes drama, and a lot of pressure, because it was telling the origin story of one of the most iconic characters in Star Wars. And I think it turned out better than a lot of people give it credit for. Is it necessary? Not really. Did we need an explanation for almost every single thing about Han Solo's life? Absolutely not. Some of the origin details feel forced, especially how he gets the name Solo. That is one of those moments where the movie feels like it's answering a question nobody really wanted answered. But as a fun sci-fi heist movie, I think it worked very well. It has a different flavor than most Star Wars movies. It's not about the Jedi, the Sith, or galaxy-ending super weapons, or massive battles between good and evil. It's more of a Western crime heist adventure in the Star Wars universe in the style of Firefly. And I like that. You're hanging out with smugglers, thieves, pilots, gangsters, and people operating at the morally gray corners of the galaxy. And although Aaron Wright had an almost impossible job stepping in Harrison Ford's shoes, and while nobody can fully replace Harrison Ford as Han, I think he did a really good job capturing the younger, more inexperienced version of the character. And of course, we have Donald Glover as Lando. He was perfectly cast. He's got the voice, the charm, the confidence, and style. He absolutely understood what was asked of him. Every time he's on screen, the movie gets a little more interesting. But I am not a huge fan of L3. I find her annoying. But overall, the supporting cast is still solid, the action is fun, and the world feels different enough to justify its existence. It is honestly a shame the movie underperformed, because I would have loved to see more of this era and these characters, although it is kind of fitting that Solo is one of the Star Wars movies that didn't make all the money back. Now, it may not be one of the great Star Wars movies, but it's certainly fun, and sometimes that's enough. Number 8, Force Awakens. I know the movie is basically a remake of New Hope. A lonely young hero on a desert planet discovers a droid carrying important information. There's a masked villain, an older mentor figure, a giant planet-destroying weapon, a trench run-style attack. The similarities are very obvious. But even with that criticism, I still find it entertaining. After the prequels, this movie brought back the sense of energy, momentum, humor, and adventure that a lot of people were missing from the franchise. Rey is immediately likable. Finn has a great setup as a stormtrooper, breaks away from the First Order. Poe is charismatic. BB-8 is adorable. Kylo Ren, though he is a little bit flawed with execution, is kind of written as an interesting villain because he's not just trying to be Darth Vader, he's desperately trying to live up to and outdo Darth Vader, and that is a compelling idea. Say what you will about where they took it later, but for the first movie, it works pretty well. The movie also knows how to move. It's fast-paced, funny, exciting, and mostly accessible. From a pure entertainment standpoint, it works. Seeing Han Solo and Chewbacca whack back into the Millennium Falcon is a genuinely great theater moment. The biggest problem is the movie does play things too safe. Instead of boldly launching a new era, it spends a lot of time trying to reassure fans that this still feels like Star Wars. And I get why they did that, especially after the divisive reactions to the prequels, but it also means the movie does not fully stand on its own as much as it could have. Still, I think it's more engaging than the prequels. It may be familiar, but is familiar in a way that is entertaining. Number 7, The Last Jedi. And yes, I know this is one of the most controversial Star Wars movies ever made. People are still arguing about this movie almost 10 years later. But I still think it gets way more hate than it deserves. Now that being said, it's not perfect, it definitely has issues. The Canto Bight storyline is filler, it slows the movie down, and while I understand the themes it's going for about war profiteering and moral compromise, that whole section is not nearly as compelling as the Rey Kylo Luke material. Also, I think the codebreaker should have been Lando instead of just this random new character. That would have been much more interesting. It would have tied the story more directly into the original trilogy and given Lando a meaningful role before Episode 9. I am also still iffy on the idea that Luke would briefly consider killing Ben Solo just because he sensed darkness in him. This is the same Luke Skywalker who believed there was still good in Darth Vader, so the idea that he would ignite a lightsaber over his sleeping nephew is a very hard idea to buy into. I understand the movie is exploring ideas of failure, shame, fear, and regret. I understand it is not saying Luke fully intended to do it, but it is still a choice I struggle with. That said, there is a lot more to the movie that I really like. The throne room scene with Snoke is one of the best sequences in the trilogy. The Red Room, the Praetorian Guards, Rey and Kylo fighting side by side, it is visually stunning and emotionally intense. I also liked the movie challenges the idea of legacy. Rey wants to know where she comes from because she thinks that will define her. Kylo tells her she comes from nobody, and whether or not later movies change that, the idea in this movie is powerful. You do not have to come from an important bloodline to matter. That is a strong Star Wars theme. Now, the film is messy, it made some choices I don't exactly agree with, but I'd rather watch a messy movie with ideas than a safe movie with no ambition. And I do think this movie at least had ambition. Number 6, The Rise of Skywalker. And I already know some people are going to be very angry with how high I put it on the list, because this movie has become one of the Star Wars hundreds that a lot of people love to tear apart. And I get it, there are plenty of problems. The pacing is frantic, the movie feels like it's spreading from one plot point to another with barely room to breathe. Palpatine coming back is not explained very well. Hux suddenly being a spy feels like it comes out of nowhere. Finn and John are still underdeveloped. And the last 20 minutes definitely feel like Star Wars is doing a copy of Avengers Endgame. You have the big final fleet battle, the heroes arriving, the giant climactic showdown, the inspirational crowd-pleasing moments. It's very obvious what kind of finale they were going for. But despite all of that, I still really enjoy the movie. I know it's messy, I know the story has issues, I know it's trying to wrap up not just one trilogy, but the entire Skywalker saga, while also responding to fan backlash from the previous movie. But as an emotional big adventure Star Wars finale, I have fun with it. I like Rey in this movie. I like the idea that she is related to Palpatine but chooses the name Skywalker. Some people really hate that, but I actually do not have a problem with it. To me, it fits the idea of found family. Blood does not have to define who you are. And honestly, The Mandalorian Season 3 makes a similar point with Grogu taking Din Djarin's name through adoption. It's basically the same emotional idea. Family can be chosen, names can represent who raised you, who loved you, and who helped shape you. So Rey choosing Skywalker does not bother me. What does bother me is the Kylo and Rey romance. I am not a fan of that at all. Kylo tortured her in Force Awakens. He harmed people she cared about. Their connection is interesting, but turning it romantic does not work for me. I also think Finn deserved much more in this trilogy. The idea of a former stormtrooper becoming a hero is one of the best concepts in the sequel trilogy, and it never fully gets the development it should have. But even with those problems, the Rise of Skywalker is still entertaining to me. His adventure, emotion, big Star Wars spectacle, and moments that work for me even when the story is a bit messy. I know it's not a popular opinion, but I have fun with it, and sometimes that's all that matters. Number 5, Revenge of the Sith. For me, this is easily the best movie in the prequel trilogy, even though that's not a very high bar. This is the one where the tragedy finally lands. We see the Republic fall, we see the Jedi destroyed, we see Anakin become Darth Vader, we see the friendship between Obi-Wan and Anakin completely break apart. There is real emotional weight here. But I do still have issues with the movie. Anakin's turn to the dark side feels too quick. I understand the basic motivation. He fears losing Padme, Palpatine manipulates that fear, the Jedi do not fully trust him, his emotions get twisted until he makes terrible choices, but the actual shift from conflicted Jedi to slaughtering children happens very fast. That is one of the hardest things for me to fully buy into, especially because this same character eventually becomes a Force ghost at the end of Return of the Jedi. I understand redemption is central to Star Wars, but Anakin killing younglings is so extreme that it makes that redemption hard to process. I have heard the original cut of this movie was something like 4 hours long, and part of me wonders if a longer version would have helped with some of the issues. Maybe Anakin's fall would feel more gradual, maybe the emotional progression would breathe more. But even with those problems, it still has some of the strongest moments in the entire saga. The opening space battle is fun. Palpatine is wonderfully manipulative. Order 66 is heartbreaking. The music is incredible. And that final duel between Obi-Wan and Anakin is one of the best lightsaber fights in the franchise. It's not just flashy, it's emotional. These are two brothers, two friends, two people who once trusted each other completely, now fighting to the death because everything has fallen apart. When Obi-Wan says, "You are my brother, Anakin," that is one of the most powerful moments of the prequel trilogy. Revenge of the Sith is not perfect, but it is tragic, dramatic, memorable, and emotionally important. It's the good movie in the prequel trilogy, and it absolutely earns a spot in the top 5. Number 4, Return of the Jedi. Let me just say this right now. The Ewoks. I know some people hate them. I know there are people that think they're too cute. I know people think they were designed merely to sell toys. I know people think it is ridiculous that a group of small creatures with spears, rocks, logs, and traps could defeat a technologically advanced empire. And yes, logically that is a pretty big leap, but I love the Ewoks. There is something charming about them, and honestly, I think they fit the fairy tale side of Star Wars. Star Wars has always had a mythic quality. It's not hard science fiction, it's fantasy in space. So a group of underestimated little creatures helping defeat an empire actually fits the spirit of the story pretty well. That being said, it's not perfect. The Luke and Leia twin reveal is very clearly a last-minute solution to the love triangle problem, and yes, George Lucas definitely seemed to forget that Luke and Leia kissed in the previous movies. Awkward! But emotionally, it works beautifully as a conclusion to Anakin's story. The throne room scenes with Luke, Vader, and the Emperor are fantastic. This is where Luke truly becomes a Jedi. Not because he defeats Vader physically, but because he refuses to become like him. He throws away his lightsaber, he chooses mercy, he chooses faith, he chooses to believe that his father is still in there somewhere. And that is when he saves Anakin. The space battle is exciting, Jabba's palace is memorable, the Sarlacc pit sequence is fun, the final celebration feels earned, and the heart of the movie is Luke redeeming Vader. That is why the film still works so well. Even with its goofier moments and the leaps of logic with Ewoks and the awkward sibling reveal, the emotional payoff is still powerful. It wraps up the original trilogy in a satisfying way and gave Anakin Skywalker's story a meaningful ending. Number 3, Rogue One. This movie is interesting because it does start a little slowly. The first arc is a lot of setup. We are jumping between characters, planets, political factions, imperial projects, rebel disagreements, and it takes a little while for the movie to fully find its momentum. Once it gets going, it's some of the best Star Wars we've ever gotten. Rogue One works because it takes a story we technically already know the ending to, and still makes it feel tense, emotional, and important. We know that Death Star planes get stolen and that they eventually make it to Leia. We know A New Hope starts right after this, but what Rogue One does so well is show the cost. This is not a clean, heroic fairy tale side of Star Wars. This is the war movie side. These are the people in the shadows making impossible choices, sacrificing everything so Hope can survive. It's a lot grittier, it's a lot more realistic, or as realistic as Star Wars can be. Jyn Erso is a strong lead because she begins as someone who does not want to be part of the fight. She's been hurt, abandoned, and hardened by the galaxy, but over time she chooses to believe that the rebellion matters. And Andor is also fascinating, because he represents the morally complicated side of the Rebel Alliance. He's done things he's not proud of, but in the name of a greater cause, and they give us the movie a more grounded edge. The supporting characters are also great. K2SO is hilarious. Chura and Maze are memorable. Bodhi Rook has a meaningful role as someone trying to do the right thing after being part of the Imperial system. And there's a third act as well. The Battle of Scarif is incredible. It's thrilling, emotional, visually stunning, and genuinely intense. You feel the desperation of every character trying to complete the mission. Every sacrifice matters. Every moment built towards that final handout for the plans. And of course, we have Darth Vader. That hallway scene is one of the greatest Darth Vader moments ever put on screen. It's terrifying and intense and shows exactly why Vader became such a legendary villain in the first place. Rogue One may be a little slow to start, but by the end it becomes one of the most powerful and exciting Star Wars movies ever made. And our runner-up is New Hope. This is the movie that started it all. And almost 50 years later, because this movie turns 50 this year, holy cow, it still holds up. And that is honestly amazing. A New Hope is simple in the best possible way. It's the classic hero's journey. Luke Skywalker is a farm boy who dreams of something more. He meets a wise mentor. He receives a call to adventure. He rescues a princess, joins a rebellion, faces evil, and becomes a hero. It is timeless storytelling. The reason this movie works so well is because everything is so clear and iconic. Luke is instantly relatable. Han Solo is instantly cool. Princess Leia is instantly memorable. Darth Vader is intensely intimidating. Obi-Wan feels wise and mysterious. The Death Star is a perfect villainous threat. The Millennium Falcon feels like a character in itself. Everything just clicks. The world building is also incredible because the movie does not over-explain everything. It drops you into the galaxy trusting to keep up. We hear vaguely about the Clone Wars. We hear about the Jedi. We hear about the Empire and the Rebellion. We do not need every detail explained right away because the world already feels lived in. And that is one of the reasons it became so special. It made the galaxy feel bigger than the movie itself. The final trench run is still one of the greatest climaxes in blockbuster history. It's suspenseful, exciting, emotional, completely satisfying. A New Hope is not just important because it launched the franchise. It's still a great movie on its own. It's charming, adventurous, funny, exciting, and full of wonder. The only reason it's not number one is because the next movie took everything great about New Hope and made it even better. And that is, of course, The Empire Strikes Back. It's not just the best Star Wars movie. It's one of the best sequels ever made. I know it's the obvious choice. I know it's the one almost everybody puts, but there's a reason for that. Because it improves on New Hope in almost every way. The story is darker, the characters are deeper, the emotional stakes are stronger, the villains feel more dangerous, the relationships become more complicated, the world expands, and the mythology grows. And the movie does all of that without losing the sense of adventure that made the first film work. The Battle of Hoth is a fantastic opening. It immediately puts the heroes on the defensive and shows that the Empire is not just some distant threat. They are actively hunting the rebels down. Luke's journey with Yoda is one of the most important parts of the entire saga. This is when Star Wars becomes more than just space battles and laser swords. We learn more about the Force, discipline, fear, failure, and what it actually means to become a Jedi. Yoda is also a perfect example of Star Wars wisdom. At first, he seems small, strange, and silly, but then you realize he is one of the most powerful and insightful characters in the entire franchise. Meanwhile, Han and Leia's relationship becomes one of the best parts of the movie. The banter is fun, but underneath that is real affection. You believe these two people are falling for each other, even though they would never make it easy. Cloud City is also one of the best settings in Star Wars. It feels beautiful and mysterious, but also dangerous. Lando is immediately charming, and his betrayal gets the story another emotional turn. And then we get to the twist ending of who Darth Vader really is. It's one of the best twist endings in movie history. And the reason it works is not just because it's shocking. It works because it completely changes Luke's understanding of himself, his father, Obi-Wan, Vader, and the entire story. Suddenly, the villain is not just the villain. The stakes are more personal. The fight is no longer just good versus evil. It's tragic, it's family. And unlike most blockbusters, Empire does not end with the heroes fully winning. Han is frozen to carbonite, Luke has lost his hand, Vader reveals the truth about who he is, the rebellion is wounded, the characters survive, but they are shaken. It is a bold ending, and it is one of the reasons this movie is so powerful. The Empire Strikes Back is everything Star Wars can be at its best. Exciting, emotional, mythic, a little bit funny, dramatic, and unforgettable. And it comes in at number one. I'm going to share some of these Star Wars movies. You can include some of the TV movies too. Like I've seen people put the Ewok movies on here. And while I didn't include those, I just thought the theatrical ones were big. But whatever you want, whatever order you want. And I will see you next time.